Okay, folks, so this is lecture 13, Imperfect Competition. May as well go into this. Let's talk a little bit about the two forms of imperfect competition. One is what's called monopolistic competition. The other one's called oligopoly. We're going to first start off with monopolistic competition, and then we're going to go into oligopoly. So far we've covered perfect competition, which is many buyers and many sellers, and monopoly, which is one seller in a market. So what makes imperfect competition different from the other two market structures that we've covered so far is that it's neither monopoly nor perfect competition. In both scenarios of imperfect competition, the firm is what we call a price searcher. They're looking for a price. They don't have to settle on a market price. They're looking for a price that will maximize their profits. Monopolistic competition and oligopolies are what we call differentiated oligopolies, and I'll explain what a differentiated oligopoly is when we get there, are the market structures that provide people with the choices that we kind of expect. So if you think about a lot of the products that we buy, we often go to like places where a lot of different sellers are clustered together in a marketplace. For instance, if you still go to the mall to do any of your shopping, you'll notice that there's a lot of stores that sell clothing, or there's quite a few stores that sell jewelry. So why do they do that? Why do they locate purposely next to their competition? It turns out that if you're selling a differentiated product, that's not a bad strategy, because if you have a place where a lot of people are selling more or less the same thing but not identical items, then you don't have to compete on price, and being located in some place where everybody's going to go to will actually bring more traffic your way. It's kind of the same thing with auto malls. Like if you think of Car Country Carlsbad or the Mile of Cars in National City, the reason that these auto dealers want to locate next to each other is because they know that when people go shopping for a car, they usually want to test drive 2 or 3 cars at the same time on the same day. And so if you're located somewhere where it's easy for people to do that, you'll get more traffic and you'll also get more sales. So this is why, in a sense, clustering can be good for competition. You're not selling the exact same product, and therefore you don't have to rely on cutting price. Your product is differentiated enough that you can compete on something else. All right, so in monopolistic competition, we have many firms. Maybe we don't have as many firms as we would in perfect competition, but we still have quite a few. Each one of these firms is not big enough to move the market. We might have some larger firms. Like if you think of retailing, that's monopolistic competition. So among retailers, what do you have? You have department stores and you have boutique stores as well. But none of even the biggest player, even like a Walmart or an Amazon, isn't so large that it can dominate the market. The type of products that are sold in monopolistic competition, they're differentiated, meaning that they're not identical to a product that another company is going to sell. Conditions of entry, somewhat easy to very easy to enter. It may be actually a little bit harder than in perfect competition to enter a monopolistically competitive marketplace, but it's not impossible. Non-price competition, significant. Firms compete on the basis of having products that are not identical. There are large and small firms in monopolistically competitive markets. So because we're mostly talking about retail, the larger firms would be like department stores or discount stores or chain restaurants or something along those lines. And when we talk about small firms in monopolistic competition, we're talking about boutiques, let's say, or individual restaurants. So in monopolistic competition, it's not the same as monopoly or perfect competition. It has actually elements of both. That's where it gets its name from. And in fact, I'll show you where it's like monopoly and where it's more like perfect competition. You've got many buyers and many sellers, so there's no strategic games. When we get to oligopoly, we'll find out that when there's only a few players in the market, we actually do assume that these market participants do engage in strategic games. Sellers offer differentiated products, meaning that the products are similar, but they're not identical. and sellers can easily enter and exit the market. Those are the characteristics of monopolistic competition. So here's what we're going to assume. We're going to assume that the monopolistic competitive firm comes into the market with a product, a brand new product that is a hit. They're the only ones that sell this product, and therefore they have a demand curve. So their demand curve is downward sloping to reflect the fact that they're the entire market. This is, however, their short-run demand curve. We're going to see what changes in the long run when competitors come in a moment. So because they have a downward sloping demand curve, they have a separate downward sloping marginal revenue curve. And the monopolistically competitive firm is going to do just what the monopolist would do in a situation like that. To determine their output, they're going to look at where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. This is going to give us the short run level of output. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go all the way up, like we did in Monopoly, to the demand curve, and then over to the price axis. And this is the price that the monopolistically competitive firm will charge. Now, does the monopolistically competitive firm make an economic profit? The answer to that is it depends. We're going to assume that they do. We're going to assume that the average total cost at the output level the monopolistically competitive firm has chosen, QSR, is at the average total cost is less than the price. So as a result, it's making a profit per unit of the difference between the price it charges and its average total cost at that price times the number of units it sells. So we're going to assume that it makes an economic profit. Okay, this is the short run though. In the long run, what we expect is going to happen is that other firms are going to be able to enter the market. Remember, we didn't say that there were high barriers to entry, that it was very difficult to come into the market. Other firms will see that this firm is doing quite well, and they'll be able to imitate what that firm is doing. And therefore, what we expect would happen would be the demand curve would shift to the left, not to the right, to the left. And we also would expect that the demand curve in the long run for this one firm's product will become more elastic. In other words, when the firm had the market all to itself, and it was the only one producing this product, it not only was selling more, but its demand curve was relatively inelastic. Now that the firm has competition, it's not selling quite as much, and its product is not quite so unique. The example I like to use for monopolistically competitive firms are think of, like, say, fast food, for example, or think of Rubio's, the story behind Rubio's. So, Ralph Rubio, local guy, went to San Diego State, lives in North County, came up with the idea of selling fish tacos in the early 1980s. And for a while, he was the only one doing it, and there was a line in front of his store in PB pretty much day and night. So other people realize that, hey, this fish taco, Rubio's onto something with this fish taco, so they can't come into the industry. They decide that they're going to go ahead and make fish tacos. And so the next thing you know, this store that was selling a lot of tacos day and night is selling less. So that's the demand curve shifting to the left. Now it's going to have a different marginal revenue curve than it did before. Why is that? Because again, the demand curve is more elastic than it was before. So the firm is going to do the same thing it did when it had the market all to itself. It's going to set the output level at where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, but this time it's going to go up to its new demand curve, which is DLR. That's their long run demand curve, and over to the price axis. And so now what we're going to see in the long run is that the firm is going to be charging a lower price, right? PLR, the long run price, is less than PSR, the short run price, and the monopolistically competitive firm is going to be selling less. In other words, QSR was what they were selling in the short run when they had the market all to themselves. QLR is what they're selling in the long run when they are faced with competition. All right, what else do we notice about this long run equilibrium for the firm? Well, we notice that the average total at the price is equal to average total cost. So it's no longer making an economic profit. Originally, when the firm had the market all to itself, what it was doing, again, was equating marginal revenue to marginal cost, in the short run, going all the way up to the demand curve and over to the price axis, and price was greater than average total cost, so it was making an economic profit. It's still doing the same thing here in terms of its output decision, but in the long run, it is not likely to make an economic profit because the best they can do is match their long run average total cost. Now remember, um, breaking even in the economic sense, in other words, not making an economic profit, does not mean they aren't making an accounting profit. They're just making a normal rate of return on invested capital, an accounting profit with a normal rate of return on invested capital and the owner's time. So it's a business, it's a profitable business, but it's nothing like the next Google or the next Apple or anything like that. Another feature of monopolistic competitive output is that it's inefficient. So what do we mean by that? An efficient level of output would be where we're producing at the lowest long-run average total cost, which would be at the bottom of this U-shaped curve that we call the long-run average total cost curve. It's the monopolistic competitive firm is not doing that. It's actually producing on the downward portion of the long-run average total cost curve, which means that if it could produce more, if somehow it could provide more to the market, it would be producing at an efficient level. But this is actually the best the firm can do because this is where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. In other words, QLR, if the firm were to produce more than QLR, it would see its own profits go down. And if the firm were to produce less than QLR, it could actually increase its profit by producing a little bit more. So there's really no incentive for the firm to produce more, to try to produce more efficiently, because its profits would actually wind up going down. So this is what we believe is going to happen in under monopolistic competition. So in monopolistic competition, the firm doesn't necessarily take the competitor's actions into account. We will see that in oligopoly they do. We expect that the firm will only make economic profits in the short run under monopolistic competition. We don't expect a firm operating under monopolistic competition to make a profit in the long run. We also believe that this market structure is inefficient because firms produce above the minimum on their long run average total cost curve. They compete by selling differentiated products, which is good for us because it provides the variety that we like. We don't all want to be wearing the same shirt or driving the same car. we want a little bit of variety in our lives. How do we get producers to do that for us? Well, we reward them when they provide us with a product that's different than what some other producer has. All right, what about advertising? So why do firms spend money on advertising? They're trying to accomplish two things. They're trying to shift out the demand curve and make it more inelastic. That sounds like two things, but that's actually one. And then the second thing that they're trying to do is they're trying to produce at a lower long run average total cost. So imagine that you're a company and you're thinking about advertising. You're afraid that if you spend money on advertising, it's going to increase your cost, but you know that that risk could pay off if it leads to more sales and if it leads to you being able to, let's say, raise your price. So here's what happens if you hire an advertising agency that maybe doesn't know what they're doing. The additional amount of advertising is going to shift your long run average total cost curve out to the right. And you've got to pay for this advertising before you find out whether or not it's successful. So imagine that you hire the wrong firm. Imagine that you're producing over here at Q&A being with no advertising, and you're on the blue long run average total cost curve. This additional amount of money that you spend on advertising, that's kind of like a fixed expense. So it shifts out your long run average total cost curve. And because the firm you hire to help you advertise doesn't know what they're doing, you wind up over here at C. So the only thing that's happened is your cost has gone up and maybe your demand curve is still the same. It's this relatively elastic demand curve down here, not this relatively inelastic demand curve over here. So that's not good. But on the other hand, if you were to choose a firm that really knew what they were doing, and let's say it shifted out your demand curve on the left graph to the right and made it more inelastic, then that would be good because now maybe you could charge a higher price and sell a higher quantity. And if you are able to actually sell a higher quantity, even though you're on this higher long run average total cost curve, because there's a certain amount of economies of scale, you'll be over here at B instead. And at B, your long run average total cost would actually be less than the long run average total cost when you were selling, when you were not advertising. When you were on the lower long run average total cost curve, because you were higher on the long run average total cost curve without advertising than you are over here on the green long run average total cost curve with advertising. So that's one of the reasons why firms will invest in advertising. All right, we'll pick it up with oligopoly when we get back.